There's three sorts of people. There's people who understand the opportunity around the tools. And obviously there's people who are really sort of anti it. We wanted to understand as a VFX company what this actually meant. Do these tools actually work? What do they do? What don't they do? So things like, rotoscoping and cleanup and all those horrible things. If you talk to a compositor they really don't want to do, well, you could argue the clients have the ultimate say in terms of how these tools can be used and, maybe even what sorts of tools ultimately could be used. I firmly believe that somebody at some point is going to invent the Maya of generative. I think the world has changed over the last few years. I think there needs to be a different focus on how we train people. But I think some of the opportunities that we're seeing with things like generative that are going to be really important. He came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, it looked exactly like that. He did an amazing job.
Yes. Welcome to the VFX Script Podcast with Motus VFX. We are on episode 8 today, and we have someone who's been in the game for a little while. Some would say is a veteran and pretty well known in London. Been at Russia's, went to Prodigious. Now he is with Cinesite as their Gen AI lead. Mr. Andy Mac, how you doing, buddy?
Not too bad, my friend. How's it going? It's lovely to be here, and under these circumstances, it's really nice to chat.
Good man. I'm pretty groovy, mate. I think, how long is it now since we first met? It's got to be coming up to 9-10 years.
Must be, really, because I remember we used to have this relationship where you used to be able to find amazing talent for me. Certainly when I was at Rush's, and obviously we used to set you some quite difficult tasks, didn't we? As I recall, when you were doing that.
No, I appreciate. I still remember the lunch. I managed to annoy you into a lunch in Armo in Soho, I think it was. Yeah. It's good old times, man. Let's I sort of mix it up each sort of episode on how I do it. Let's go straight into the juicy stuff. Your job title is an interesting one now.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff happening in this world.
Yeah.
And, being with Cinesite, one of the bigger VFX houses globally, probably a position that maybe took a lot of thought and planning.
Yeah.
So as someone who's sort of heading up the sort of AI arm of Cinesite, what does that entail?
That's a really good question, Kurt. Look, I think if we go back 2 years, where all the interesting things that happened in the industry during this period, and as a parallel track beyond, obviously, COVID and the writer's strike and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of challenges with the business in terms of clients recalibrating their slate of work and all that kind of stuff. It's all well documented. In parallel to that, obviously, technology had been evolving. And obviously, my personal journey, obviously, post-COVID and all the rest of it was individually looking at what these kind of technologies were doing. And I think internally at Cinesite as well, when I was head of CG, we're talking to our CTO, Michele Skillet, who's incredible driving force behind, innovation and things we're trying to do here. We identified, or he identified, that we needed to start having a position on what these tools and technologies with AI, specifically generative AI, meant for the business and certainly for the industry as a whole. Completely aware of all the ethics and all the challenges around it, and we've got our eyes open about all that kind of stuff. But I think in order for us to really understand as a business and understand, I suppose, the cut through the noise, cut through the bullshit, cut through all that stuff that you see on LinkedIn and Reddit about the negativity and it can't do this and can't do that. We wanted to understand as a VFX company what this actually meant. Do these tools actually work? What do they do? What don't they do? And how is the technology likely to evolve? So towards the end of last year, management through Michele and a little bit myself, we decided that it was a great idea to start setting up an investigation unit called TechX. Started at the beginning of the year to look at these technologies and try and understand what the ground truth is with the tools, and become ourselves pretty much experts in this area. But look at it through a VFX, animation, and also we've got an immersive division as well. Understand what that meant for a range of sort of areas, really. So that's it. So we set it up as a kind of very small kind of investigative exploration group. It's not a production arm, so we're not touching client work at this stage. It's purely looking at what do all these tools and technologies and workflows do, and how in the future you could extrapolate that to allow us possibly to use them to give us an advantage somewhere in that very, very complex production process, as you know. So that's the bottom line of what it's about.
Understood. And obviously you mentioned you've been looking into tools and whatnot, and I'm sure you can't go into heaps of detail about what you're doing. However, can you talk about or mention some of the tools that you've been exploring?
Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much a number of different pillars of investigation. Pretty much everything from commercial stuff out there that's to do with the platform. So look, we're looking at the same thing everyone else has got on their desktop, comparing, contrasting, doing unit tests against all these things to see what works and what doesn't. But then the other thing we're doing is looking at things like open source models, Comfy UI, those kind of, I guess, leading edge technologies at the moment that are the more mature kind of stuff that we think that have some mileage in terms of being able to scale, that we can customize potentially and have some sort of roadmap in terms of longevity and how we can use them in production and dovetail in possibly in the longer term how that could work. So it's exactly the same tools and technologies that everyone else is using. Obviously, there's a number of different areas that we've been investigating that are of specific interest. And, there's two different pillars as well beyond that. It's things like, incremental adoption, which is one of them. It's basically look at department structure. Are there ways in which some of these tools can take away some of the drudgery of some of the elements that obviously artists don't want to actually do, but obviously time consuming and could be expensive? So things like, rotoscoping and cleanup and all those horrible things that are really, if you talk to a compositor, they really don't want to do, and you have to outsource usually. And there's other things, and having a view on the more disruptive end of things like what we call generative AI, which are basically things that can do entire shots or do something that's very different from the workflows we currently have in VFX or feature animation. So those are the two areas really, is trying to understand incremental adoption. What does that look like? Where we can get an advantage efficiency-wise, and maybe give artists better tools to allow them to be more creative and have them in the loop constantly as part of that process as well.
How's that being received at Cinesite in terms of the sort of the artists? Are they on board? Are you managing to get good traction with them utilising some of this stuff and user testing?
I think it's a journey. I think if you'd asked me this question a year ago, well, I'd give you a very different answer. I think we're still on this pathway where there's an education piece around all this as well. And what we're trying to do is potentially do things like workshops and 101s and all that kind of stuff. And we're trying to be as transparent as we can about what some of these workflows we're investigating. So going back to your question, which I answered in a very long-winded way, is you're always going to... There's three sorts of people. There's people who understand the opportunity around the tools.
Yep.
There's people who are 50-50. There's some nervousness. There's the usual stuff that you get with any sort of disruption and change. And obviously there's people who are really sort of anti it. And, we completely understand that there will be those people. But what we've spotted over certainly the last 6 months, certainly even the last 3 months, is that there's a slow change in perception as the tools mature and people understand it's probably not going to be just a fad. It's something that's going to be part of a longer-term visual effects or animation workflow. And I think we're starting to see a lot more interest in people who are actually want to embrace and really want to find out more about what the tools and technologies can do. So I think there's a number of different things. Asked me a year ago, I'd probably say a lot more in the other two camps, but now we're moving in a slightly different kind of direction. But lots of challenges around, longer term things like implementation, how you roll these things out. Are they still good enough to be used in production? You've got client challenges as well about how these things can and can't be used. So it's a waiting game. We're being objective. We're trying to do it properly as best we can, as you would expect from a company like this. But it really is trying to make artists part of that process and give them better tools and try and leverage what generative AI allows us to do that we couldn't do before. We may possibly be more efficient. That's pretty much it, really.
100%. I mean, that's key. I think when you said there's 3 types of people, I thought you was going to give us a Team America reference. I'm glad you didn't. I would have had to cut that pretty quickly.
No, I wasn't going to go down that route. I know you mean.
That's just me. Okay, interesting stuff. And you're talking then about, client challenges and whatnot. Are you guys at a point where Cinesite are going into meeting rooms now with studios and talking about what you're doing, or are you still keeping things in-house?
I'd be telling porcupines if I said there wasn't interest from studios. Certainly being inquisitive about the sorts of things that we're doing. Mm-hmm. I think certainly some of the guidelines recently from places, studios like Netflix are starting to help change the narrative a bit more in terms of how they think this stuff could be used in the future, and some guidelines around that as well. So I think it's always been a challenge to see what the clients are their perception is and how that's moving, because that impacts, how we're going to use them. It's all very well us coming up with amazing perspectives on generative AI tools, but until, the clients have some guidelines around how we can use it, then you can't use them in production. I think we're still early days in that process.
And that kind of interesting sort of point you raised there, sort of kind of waiting for the studios to kind of set these guidelines. Is there a world in which the vendors can set the guidelines and actually go back to the studio?
Well, you could argue the clients have the ultimate say in terms of how these tools can be used, and maybe even what sorts of tools ultimately could be used. I mean, yet again, we come back to some of the challenges around things like how these are trained, Chinese models versus ethically trained stuff, open source, which obviously we can have inside our content network, and we can control, data security and things like that. And then, you have sort of platforms, like your runways and those kind of tools that are, obviously the data goes outside your network. You don't know what then happens to it. So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff around that at the moment, which is sort of means studios are quite cautious about how that kind of stuff's going to be used, and quite rightly, because as soon as the data goes outside a visual effects studio, there's no guarantee that data then gets trained on somebody else's model. So there's a lot of considerations around this at the moment, I think.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, when I'd spoken to a few people on the studio side, sort of back in Feb, the conversation was definitely a lot different to what it is now.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, and I asked that question because I'm a big fan of being a bit of a disruptor, and and would love VFX to look a little bit different. And if there's any way possible that vendors and things on the VFX side can take a bit of power back, maybe this is a way, or is it a case of whatever the studio execs say goes,
Yeah.
or is there a world where disruptors like yourself potentially are actually going back to them with solid solutions and them actually getting invested in that, and instead of them creating the guidelines, you are?
Yeah, I mean, I think unless you're further up the food chain and you own the IP, which obviously they do, I don't think you have as much power or leverage. But, you've got things like, can you do things faster, cheaper, quicker, but maintain the same quality? That triangle where you get all of them and you've got to choose two. Well, obviously, clients always want you to have three if you can.
Yeah.
But maybe there is some angles where, we can go up the food chain in terms of developing our own IP and stuff like that. But, there's a lot to think about there, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think on the whole, and anyone in the audience can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do feel like from that VFX vendor standpoint, people are looking at this quite ethically, I think.
Yeah.
Which is great. Someone's bought Vimeo recently, and I was reading that in the small print, any imagery, any reels that are on the platform can be used and are sort of going into open source, and that's where I'm not particularly a fan of rolling like that.
I mean, the whole ethical stuff is really interesting, and obviously it's something we've looked at in great depth as a team. And there's some quite interesting conclusions. I mean, obviously the leading platform at the moment is Moon Valley. Obviously, Ben Locke and that team, they're doing a great job trying to promote that. Got some nice features and stuff. And Adobe, obviously had been selling it their Firefly as a kosher option in that space. But I think one of the things that's coming up is the sheer amounts of data these models need to produce high quality results.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as you start reducing the data sets they're trained on by purely ethical stuff, you're not going to be able to compete effectively with a model that can scrape everything, ethically or not. And I think that's the challenge at the moment around some of these ethical models. And it's the reason why, I'm sorry if anyone from Adobe is listening to this. This is the reason why probably Adobe are now adopting other third-party platforms as part of their platform, because they realize they can't compete with your VO3s and your other image models as well at the moment. So it's an interesting challenge, I think.
100%. And that's when we come into that constant conversation of what an artist looks like in the next 12, 24, 36 months. I believe that we're going to live in a world where artists exist 100%.
Spot on.
It's just going to look a little bit different.
I think so. And I think exactly it. I think there's two things that will change. I think that probably the skill sets around what let's say artist 2.0 looks like in the future, as well as the tooling around that as well. And I think starting off with the tooling, I think there's a lot of disparate technologies for you to do anything that's vaguely kind of professional at the moment in terms of these tools. So you're using different bits, bits of Runway, Kling, 11 Labs for audio and that kind of stuff. But, I firmly believe that somebody at some point is going to invent the Maya of generative, which will combine 3D, 2D, number of different modalities of, sketching, audio input, 3D kind of blockouts. And I think the person who can crack all those things, or the company that cracks all those things, will allow a completely different set of tools in the hands of artists. And in skill sets, yet again, I think it does appear that we're heading a little bit towards more generalist kind of ways of thinking about stuff at the moment. I think perhaps the future pipeline 5-10 years time could look different. Maybe we won't have such rigorous department structures. Yep. We're going to have hybrid workflows where AI will form part of being able to allow people to do stuff. And I think compositing will be hugely important as part of that process, because they're going to be the people who will be inputting generative layers, perhaps in Nuke as a separate component. And there are certain disciplines that you can actually see will thrive in this brave new world. But I think the skill sets around it are going to be important. I do a lot of work with universities. And this is something that I'm trying to impress at the moment, that the graduates of the future, what the next generation of artists could look like, need to start embracing some of these tools when they mature a bit further, I think, as well.
I'm going to chop and change. You just mentioned a couple of really interesting things there. First one, I was actually going to say, are we going to enter a world where, the generalist makes a comeback? Because I feel like it has become quite specialist over the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, my requirements for Motus have certainly not, we very rarely get asked for generalists these days. Are generalists going to make a comeback in a different way? And you kind of answered that.
Yeah.
The thing that you said then, which I absolutely fucking loved, was talking about the university stuff, because that's something that I don't think happens enough. I don't think there's enough good senior people going back to universities, schools, and letting these people know that this exists. People coming out of university need to be in a better position to actually hit the ground running.
Yeah.
I feel like, there's art effects over in France who are badass. Those guys come out of art and they're kind of just ready to go into the world of visual effects. I would say that, considering, Soho was classed the home of visual effects, I think that the university's courses are lacking, and that needs to be better. So I think that you're doing an awesome thing there, and I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. There's a few universities I'm sort of involved with on advisory board capacity.
That's really cool.
More about that again. I'm sure that Cinesite will be announcing a few things soon. But it's really important, really, because I think that there's a bit of a sausage machine with universities, certainly with VFX, that bases everything on department structures and specialist kind of stuff, which is fine. I think the world has changed over the last few years. I think there needs to be a different focus on how we train people. And yet again, the foundation skills are the same. They're all about sort of base level art and design kind of, skills effectively. But I think some of the opportunities that we're seeing with things like generative and things like that are going to be really important. And I think some of the problems with universities are they take so long to set up a course, and to change tack and get them recertified means, I do appreciate that it's not as straightforward as that, but I think things are moving really quickly and things need to adapt fast in terms of what's happening out there, I think, as well. So
good on you, mate. That's awesome. Big fan of that. And when you guys announce more, let me know. I'd love to.
Cool.
I'd love to sort of share that story, because I'm a big believer in that next generation.
Yeah, it's cool.
And I think, there's got to be a way to have these, individuals a little bit more sort of prepared, especially when they're spending that kind of money.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit soul destroying when you see lots of graduates who are trying to go for junior roles. I mean, companies are bumping along, certainly in London at the moment, in terms of how we're still not out of the woods yet. And worldwide, I think it's the same problem in a number of places. People are hiring mid to senior level people. Trying to get people in at the bottom is going to be difficult. So I think graduates need to differentiate themselves a little bit. Maybe generative's one of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. Could be.
Look, let's go back into things a little bit more traditionally on that point from a VFX standpoint. And again, devil's advocate, as I do. Does every show need mid to seniors? Is it? And again, I am not in the vendor, so can't comment, but we'll throw it out there. or is it just a case of I need to get this show done, and I know that I'm not going to get told off if I have someone of that caliber doing it, even though we don't need them?
It's a good question. I think, from experience, I think, I've seen shows with lots of junior people in other companies. You do need a hierarchy of people know what they're doing. I think there's no substitute sometimes for experience. And I think, yes, I think you do. I think that there is a pressure on every visual effects vendor to deliver. Mm-hmm. If you can guarantee and optimize your any of the ambiguity or any points of pressure points, then you will lean into your senior team where possible. Yeah. But saying that, it's been interesting to see how a lot of people step up when they're put under pressure to go to the next level. And I think, so I can think of a number of cases at Cinesite where we've put people in more senior roles who've, you can tell they're ready to go, and you can pretty much use them as a more senior capability, and I think that's to do with VFX Studio is pretty good at having a funnel of how you move people through the system when they're ready. I think the big problems are when you move people up too fast into those roles, really. But
No, all makes sense. And like I said, I always ask this question.
Good question, Kurt.
Because I just, again, I like to try and understand these things. When I look at it from a really base level, and you take out the ins and outs of business and whatnot. A junior, depending on where they are in the world, may cost. Let's just do it. It's going to give or take 5K, but let's say 30K.
Yeah.
There's a lot of visual effects vendors out there, and is that 30K going to be the defining factor that sends you under or keeps you afloat? And what infrastructure needs to go in to hire that? Because if every vendor out there hired one junior a year and brought them through at that cost, we'd have a lot more people in the pool potentially. Yeah. So yeah, I think that without any understanding, and you might turn around and say, look, that's just not possible. But without understanding the situation, because no one's really explained it to me, I don't get why that's not possible.
Yeah, I mean, where possible, we do try and move people up. I mean, we've got some great runners who we try where possible to slot them in. Junior roles, very difficult to come by at the moment, and has been for the last 2 or 3 years, really. But yet again, I think it's then down to responsibility of how you manage that transition upwards in terms of training, putting them through departments so they understand not just the specialist bits, but general production workflows. And I think that's often what happens when you get people out of college. They're probably pretty good on the box. They probably can do things reasonably well to pass, the first stage of recruitment. But it's understanding production processes and notes and the supervisor rounds and all that kind of stuff. I think that's the big thing that you can't really learn from books or colleges, really. You need to put people onto shows and see how they do. And there's an overhead in doing that. There's a supervisory overhead to try and keep people. And I also think as well, it's got worse because since COVID, I'll be honest, Cinesite's completely working from home these days, really, pretty much. It might be different in different sites around the group, but we're London definitely work from home. So you can imagine companies that do have working from home policies, it is more difficult to train people because you can't point at the screen and slap people's wrists if it looks rubbish and stuff like that. So, and I think we have lost something with that kind of in this new world, really. I suspect.
Yeah, well, no, for sure. I mean, it feels like you could, before COVID, you could go to a pub in Soho on a Monday on your own.
Yeah,
and just meet an army.
Yeah, you could hire an entire visual effects studio in about an evening, couldn't you? Really, because somebody would know somebody who knew somebody else who knew somebody else.
Absolutely.
And even that kind of thing. How Soho in London has sort of pretty much vanished as a community, really, isn't it? It's I think it started before COVID as companies started moving out of centre due to rents and all that kind of stuff. But we've lost a bit of that sort of 10, 15 years ago vibe that used to be around. So a bit sad.
100%.
Sad, isn't it? Sad.
Oh, massively.
No, not enough drinking anymore. Terrible.
Not enough drinking. Like it was almost like football hooliganism, not in the sense of, VFX artists throwing bottles, but, every kind of house had their own pub.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was brilliant.
Well, the George was the animator's pub, wasn't it? If your CG artist pub, you used to go there if you wanted to fraternise with.
It was brilliant,
CG people.
and there's got to be a way to bring that back. I mean, Flip. I remember when I started Motus, I was just going around Soho door knocking. you know,
I remember.
Old school.
Yeah,
just knocking on the doors. But it's funny how things turn. But let's come back to you, Andy, and what was your route into this world?
I was asked this a while ago on another interview thing, and it was interesting. I mean, I'd always had an interest in art and design and technology and computers, as it was called. And for those of you of a certain age, I'm actually quite old. So even though I probably look a bit younger than I am, so I cut my teeth on things like the ZX81 and Spectrum and Amiga and things like that. But I went to college and I studied what was then called information technology, but was basically half a computer science and half an electronic engineering degree. I specialised in pretty much hardcore computer graphics programming, which is really dull. Well, I thought it was after I did it for a few years. But I used to write renderers and all kind of stuff like that. So, quite on the technical end. Spent a bit of time at IBM. It was my first job. I was an industrial trainee in R&D, writing renderers and looking at new applications of CGI. And this was late 90s. So it was, we're talking sort of plotting shit out on graph paper and mainframes and days to render a frame and all that kind of stuff, really. And then I went back to college and I realised that, and there were no VFX courses.
Yeah,
none.
okay.
They were just general kind of animation or graphic design things, and we had a computer in the corner of the room that had some 3D software on it, and that's how I started. And then, so I did an MA in graphics, and the rest is history, really. I worked a bit for Alias, going around doing training and consultancy, and that was quite interesting around the world. So I got trained up a bit by Alias for free, which is great. For those of you of a certain age who don't know what Alias was, it was the precursor to Maya. So there we go. It was so that's another thing. And then I ended up at the BBC, same department that used to do Doctor Who back in the day. Trained up by those guys. It's amazing. So you learn how to do things fast and rapid, and where to cut corners, but you really get your eye trained very early in those kinds of things. And yet again, it was a generalist kind of roles in those days. If you talk to anyone who was in Soho through the 90s and early 2000s, it was a generalist kind of vibe about the whole thing. To find specialists was quite rare.
Yeah.
And then go through career, long spells in commercials. Did a bit of freelancing, do a fair bit of immersive projects, which is my other string to my bow that I do these days, and bit of film, bit of long form stuff, and then ended up at Cinesite. And there we are. That's a potted history of my long career, really. But
because you have done the sort of the feature, episodic, and the commercial stuff.
Yeah, all very different in how they work as well in terms of clients and processes.
Absolutely, and in terms of the crossover, yes, there's differences, but also similarities. Like is there times that you'll pull from the commercial fun and games, for example, into the feature stuff?
Exactly. I think. there's a number of different comparisons between commercials and film. Film is like this rock solid oil tanker that just got, it's built to like a factory. At the end of the day, everyone knows their roles. But it's very difficult to turn it around and do something very different with it. But things like commercials and television, they're like nippy speedboats. It would just do. Everyone mucks in, and it's a lot more fluid, but it's a lot more hairy in terms of how you do things. I think it's changed a bit these days. I'm sure if you talk to guys at ETC and some of those kind of larger things, I think they are a lot more pipelined now than it was back 10, 15 years ago. But it is two different things. But yet again, the clients are different as well. Commercial clients are very, very fickle, change their mind.
Yeah.
You could have submitted something on a Friday. Your producer gets a call. You're working the weekend. It's even though it happens obviously in film, I think that with regularly, it's so unpredictable. You're talking about hours of iterations and things can change hourly. Yeah. But with film, it's a lot more predictable. It's like a slow car crash when things go wrong rather than the airbag comes out every hour sort of thing. So it's that kind of thing.
But the airbag still comes out.
The airbag still comes out. There's crunch. And film, yet again, it's having time. What I like about film is that you have time to think about doing it properly. And you have the luxury of having specialists in the mix who are focusing precisely on one thing. And often the quality between commercials and film is quite close. But when you see, a proper kind of film pipeline working at the granular level of detail they work in, it's something to behold, really. It's quite amazing.
Can you give me an example of a time you've been so deep in the shit on delivery, but you've pulled it out, got it done, and just felt really proud? Well,
obviously, you have to hide the clients, the director, the company, and the team. I was doing this was quite a few years ago. It was an episodic thing. It was a war thing, and I always remember it was a naval naval battle.
Yeah.
And we were so far behind, and it was anyway. All I can say is that we had one. It was all going very well, and there was one shot that the client really wanted, but we left it right to the end. And I remember we literally had hours to do the bloody shot, and all the other stuff was looking great by the end of it. It was a complete nightmare. We all have these kind of moments where it doesn't work at all. And this last shot, which the guy said, it's just going to be like, we're going to have it. If you can put handles on it by, it was quite long handles. It was longer than the bloody shot in the end. If you can just put handles on it, we're just going to, we're going to do like 2 seconds and it'll be over. So we had the screening, which was the big client reveal in 20, 30 people in the room. Big projection thing, and I remember looking at it, and it literally, seeing it blown up, you could see all the flaws on the shot, and he stuck on the shot for about the full length. He didn't use any of the hand; he just used the whole handles as well. It was just like me sinking in the chair like that. But that was 20 years ago. That was so. But I'm sure everyone's got horror stories of those kind of things. But never listen to a client when they say they will only use a bit of the thing that you've only been working on for a day. Sort of thing.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, we actually got asked on TikTok, of all places, to do a podcast purely on these stories.
You can cut this one in. So I think I've been particularly ambiguous what the show, what the director, and what company I was working for.
People are going to be going through the naval archives.
Yeah, but I'm sure there'll be people on LinkedIn who will be watching this will remember, oh yeah, I know the one. Yeah.
What's your feeling on the current state of content right now? Are you enjoying it?
In terms of
the story, not necessarily on a visual effects standpoint here, just from a pure film enthusiast, is storytelling at the forefront right now?
I think it's evolving. I think it's difficult if you're in the weeds in a visual effects or feature animation company to see beyond some of the negativity sometimes. There's so many pressures on the business. It'd be nice when it stabilizes a bit more, and then we can start relaxing and thinking a bit more about, the nice things.
Yep.
I think things that still, obviously you've talked about generative stuff, but my other hat is obviously working with the immersive team. And I do think the potential for VFX artists in that space is huge. I think there's going to be more of those kind of projects. I think there's definitely going to be a conversion between interactive gamification, even when generative catches up and becomes real time. You can see how the potential of really incredible world building, that everyone talks about things like the metaverse back, 5 years ago, and, everyone saw Ready Player One and as an example of what the metaverse could look like. And I think the reality was it looked, everyone who was doing metaverse projects sort of looked like computer graphics back from 1980. And I think that's what put a lot of people off. But I think we are heading towards really rich environments, really rich kind of content, generative stuff that's kind of rule-based that can be generated on the fly in the future that you can interact with, new tooling around that, and new stories to be told as well. I really do think the future of immersive is perhaps where a lot of new forms of storytelling are likely to go in the future, really. And obviously, it's something we're really interested in at Cinesite to see where that's going, and the technology is maturing. There's sort of things we can even do in that space with our clients now we couldn't do 10 years ago with big projection walls and all that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting stuff at the moment.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was having coffee with someone maybe a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying a lot of similar stuff. Have you just hired them?
No. Well, there's a lot of people looking at this as a viable option. I'm sure some other visual effects vendors have set up immersive divisions lately. I know, obviously the old chestnuts like Framestore and ILM. They've had a number of these kind of things. Disney Imagineering, obviously slightly different, but I do think there's an opportunity there to look at. Certainly, if you're an artist, it's similar workflows. You're producing content, just big formats, slightly odd, delivery specs on these things, but it's really interesting work, I think.
No, absolutely, and it's just another positive, and sort of looking at which ways the industry can go forward, cement its future, and yes, things might look a little bit different, but there is a future for sure. Absolutely.
I think we just need to get through. Certainly next year, I think things are going to evolve in perhaps in a slightly different way. I think the volume of stuff that was before might not come back as it did, but I think there'll be different kind of avenues and different ways visual effects studios recalibrate themselves. It's going to be quite interesting to see what happens.
100%. For me, I just need to finally have a year where I beat you in FPL.
Well, there we go. You see, this is the thing. For those of you who don't know, there's a big VFX league in the UK, in London, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a London VFX
London league.
So it's very competitive, but I'm currently bottom. So unless you notice, which is really worrying. Had an awful start of the season. There we go.
It happens. It happens. But look, mate, I've really enjoyed this, and there's always a question that I like to finish on. As much as it would be, talking about FPL tactics.
Don't ask me, I'm rubbish.
But I ask everybody that comes onto the pod, can you give me one peak of your VFX career so far?
There's been some interesting projects. I think on another naval battle project, which I worked. I did a show years and years ago for Channel 4, which was about the sinking of HMS Hood. It wasn't an amazing project, But for those of you who don't know, HMS Hood was the flagship of the British fleet in World War II, and it got sunk by the Germans, unfortunately. So, and it was a big thing in the UK. And basically, it went down with, I don't know, I think like 1,800 crew, and there was only 3 left. And I remember we did some shots of what the sinking of this, and it was basically, it was an eyewitness view of one of the guys who was only about 18 at the time, and he was basically bobbing up and down in the water, and he saw the bow of the ship go down and it was usual visual effects kind of stuff. Really, it was okay, the shot, but I remember I was introduced to him afterwards, and he was actually at the screening.
Nice.
And he came up to me and he shook my hand and he said, "It looked exactly like that. He did an amazing job." And that's quite a profound moment.
Awesome.
You got, but it's things like that. It's not even sometimes working on the big stuff that's as satisfying. It's those moments or those profound things where you've got a team that you've pulled through, a very difficult project. You take them down the pub and they've all overperformed, and that camaraderie, I think, as well. Or the client says something nice at the end of the project. It's not necessarily always about the final result. It's often about the story around it, I think, like that, really, which is quite interesting. But that's one that stands out. There's many others, but that was quite profound because, it was a major part of history, and you did your job as a visual effects artist, and that was quite interesting, I think. I think some of the interesting things about TechX it's an exploration unit.
Yep.
So we're not a production unit. We consciously made a decision that we could use any model to investigate. And I think you have to do it that way in order to have a very objective view of what's out there. I think if you restrict yourself to ethical models and all that stuff as purely an investigative phase, you don't get the bigger picture. So I think a lot of it is around that, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is interesting, and you're completely right. I think it'd be naive to think that it can be done any other way, especially when it's at this exploratory phase.
Yeah.
And especially if it's going to go beyond and create powerful things.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people doing things with sort of smaller closed loop systems, which is great.
Yeah.
And really cool because you can create some awesome things efficiently whilst the individual's still being creative. But that's going to have a limitation, right? I guess, or maybe not. I'm not sure.
I have a question for you, actually, which we could riff on.
Yep.
What are you seeing in terms of the current market of artists at the moment? Where's the demand for skill sets that you're having difficulty sourcing? I mean, is it things like Unreal? Is it things like Houdini still? Because remember, we had these conversations a while ago, wasn't it? Houdini has probably caught up with quite a large pool of people now who are at a certain level, I guess.
I think it's interesting because there's not really a middle ground right now. It feels like you're either a VFX house who's kind of just sat there waiting to see how this all plays out.
Yeah.
And you might be lucky enough to have some projects, so you're doing things traditionally. So yeah, comp is never gonna disappear. But when it comes to the AI side of things, that's a really interesting thing that you mentioned about Unreal, because a lot of the artists that I'm speaking to that seem switched on and I'm placing with different people are utilizing Unreal as well. And that's when I've been finding it quite interesting because, we're in that phase now where you hiring an AI specialist, whatever that may be these days. But, there's definitely people that have been playing around with stuff for a lot longer than the last 3 to 6 months. And those are the people that have been coming to Unreal, and there's divisions out there, not just on the vendor side, but the studio side that are that seems quite prominent in.
Interesting. Yeah. It's be honest, Cinesite doesn't do an awful lot of Unreal. And even we've skirted around some of the virtual production stuff for a number of reasons for that. Really interesting. And the other question is, what are you seeing in terms of things like Blender at the moment? Because obviously that's a maturing product. Feels that sort of possibly has Maya had its day? Do you think, as a recruiter? I mean, I'm asking this as a senior. I'm interviewing the interviewer,
and it's the Andy Mac podcast. Love it. I'm out of a job.
Hilarious.
Interesting. I think Maya is probably where 3ds Max was 10 years ago.
Interesting. Wow. That bad, eh?
I mean, look, it depends who you speak to, and there's going to be hardcore Maya people that are going to be, messaging me after this, calling me all sorts.
Yeah.
On the flip side, you'll have people that are saying there's nothing that Maya can do that Houdini can't, and a lot more efficient.
Yeah.
I'm not an artist, and God, you talk about your handles on your submarine. If I was an artist, it'd be an interesting one. But when it comes to Blender, people are using it. All I will say is, at the rate it's being used, I can't see it being a free tool for much longer.
Interesting.
And yeah, maybe I should be getting shares in Blender, but I just think it's the traction it's got, and people, more so again, the individuals that are looking into AI.
Yeah.
I'd be very surprised if Blender stayed as a free tool for much longer.
Interesting. I mean, they keep on getting sort of investment, don't they, from a number of sources. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I mean, we have had discussions about some of its real-time capabilities internally. It's pretty good. Things like Eevee as a renderer you can do you can almost do a few versions ago what Unreal can do in terms of sort of very, the more basic kind of stuff. But it's an interesting kind of roadmap they've got as it matures and catches up. But it's difficult to know where things are going to evolve. I mean, there's not a lot of competition in that space at the moment for software, is it? I mean, it's been static for quite a while.
And I think that's the key thing with AI, especially for now. I don't know, again, where things stand sort of mid to long term, but there's so many different tools to use for so many different finishes and different results. So I think, again, from the people I'm speaking to, from stuff that I'm doing with people in the background, very naive to maybe think that I'm going down a runway route and that's me.
Yeah.
I think there's so many different things that you can pull out of the archives to get that product, to get that finished result. And I think that's when we're talking about, is the generalist making a comeback? I think in an AI form, the individual that knows how to extract the best out of all the different tools is going to be the person that is at the top of the higher list.
I think so. I think these generalist hybrid do a bit of comp 2D, 3D, and some generative stuff is going to be a very interesting role, and with some design sensibilities as well. Maybe from a motion design background more so than a VFX background. Who knows?
Is a colorist going to be the same value? Like everyone has their colorist that never lets them go.
It's like their barber or their hairdresser. They go to their favourite colorist. I think so. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because, 15, 20 years ago, flame artists in Soho facilities were the top dogs. And then it moved to colorists being the, over the last 15 years, I suppose, as being the superstars of a lot of those kind of facilities. But yet again, I think they do such a dramatic thing to the footage to change the look. And, it's a very, very, very precise art. It is pure art, really, at the end of the day. I still imagine that's one area that possibly won't get influenced by AI. You could argue that, would a director trust an automated AI grade? No, he'd want to still go to his preferred colorist or his preferred editor to do this, because there's an intimate relationship there, I'd imagine. But if you're going for volume, who knows? If you have him set the grade and its variance on that, maybe there is some automation there. Who knows? I'm not a colorist. I don't know enough about it, really.
No, and I'm sure that in another 6-12 months' time, we're going to be having another conversation that's probably totally different to now.
We should have this conversation again in a year and see how things have evolved in the AI space. That'd be quite interesting, wouldn't it?
Well, if you haven't taken over my pod, then
I'm not interviewing you,
then I'd love to, mate. Absolutely love to. Thank you very much for coming on.
And you too, Kurt. You're a star, legend, my friend.
Top man.
Good luck. Cool.